everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Inclusive Insights podcast. I'm your host, Neetu Razdan, and today we have an insightful episode lined up for you. It's titled Beyond the Algorithms and AI Buzz Thriving in the Broader Business World. Joining us today is Yousuf Khan. Yousuf has a wealth of experience in technology and business leadership. He's currently a partner at Bridge Ventures, an investor, board member, advisor, and has held CIO and CISO titles in the past. Yousuf, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Yousuf, we're going to kick off by sharing a little bit about your background, how you got involved in the world of technology and venture capital. Would you mind telling us
Sure.
how the journey started?
Basically went to easiest way to do the headline is probably accidental CIO to unconventional VC. Accidental CIO in so much that I got a summer job at a startup, 20 odd years ago. And I ended up being in technology ever since and never left. Basically working my way up through multiple roles, working for CTOs and CIOs in multiple companies and really understanding the technology landscape. And I was just, describe myself as just a monumental nerd. And so that just allowed me to look at every aspect of how a business runs when it comes from a technology strategy standpoint. And then I eventually became a CIO of a private education company, and then really got involved in being a CIO and being involved in tech companies when I moved to the San Francisco Bay Area. I was the first CIO for a company called Qualys, and then became CIO for a company called Pure Storage when it was several hundred employees, and then left when it was several thousand employees after an IPO. And I was always involved in helping companies early stages where I was an early customer of companies like Slack and Datadog or Moveworks or Zoom. Got involved in getting to know a lot of VCs who had invested in these companies or in some cases missed those investments and kind of commiserated on my shoulder saying, well, how did we, what was exciting about this? And so I got involved in the ecosystem, having held a number of roles. I joined an early stage company, Moveworks, where I really loved the product and ran customer success there. And so, joined them when they were at very early stages. And then, decided that after several years of operating that I really wanted to be involved in investing and seeing the next generation of companies being built. And so I decided to join Ridge. And, we've been around 15 plus years. We were early investors in companies like Fastly and Braze, both of which went public. And I joined about four years ago and have not looked back, and I continue to be very excited about the opportunity.
Wow, well, that's a stellar background. I mean, I don't know where to start, where to kind of end, but I think we need a whole separate podcast for the background story.
Well, if you have trouble sleeping, I can definitely tell you about the nuances of my CIO leadership style. That really has the effect. But for now, happy to talk about anything around algorithms and AI and what I'm seeing and what I'm skeptical about, as well as what I'm excited about.
Absolutely. So with all this background and this depth in tech, how have you seen AI evolve in recent years, and what are your thoughts on its current prominence?
So broadly speaking, I think it's a very exciting time for the industry. I think it's a very exciting time for a large generation of the next generation of companies to be built with AI at the center of it. The last generation of companies had cloud at the center of it, and I think that next generation of companies will have AI at the heart of their offering. So I think it's very exciting. I think it's very, very early. I think it's too early to tell, and I think I would probably quote, one of the senior leaders at OpenAI who said some of the best things about OpenAI have not been invented yet. So, so I'm watching carefully. I'm using a lot of the technology on a daily basis and trying to test that out and see what the opportunities are. Meeting with tons of founders. Generally speaking, I'd say there's a couple of big shifts that have happened. Number one is that on the infrastructure side, NVIDIA have become pretty much the dominant player, and then there's pretty much everybody else. Interesting space, definitively transformational space, and then some. And I think that's been really, really exciting to see. The second layer from there is that the cloud providers have clearly woken up, some faster than others, to be honest with you, by being able to provide the right platforms for the next generation of AI products to be built. And then, of course, integrated into those platforms are going to be has been the foundational models. And I think that's probably been the most interesting for me to be able to see. And the reason for that is that the development that we've seen in previous generation of technology have been incremental. You've seen new features and new products being launched by the cloud providers, and that
Mm-hmm.
has basically impacted companies to be built around them and sometimes solving problems. But the really exciting part about AI is really it's transformative in its nature as well as its velocity. You have companies who have basically built probably a business and a product offering around, say, OpenAI's, ChatGPT or around GPT 3.5, and then 4 shows up, and that basically, completely blows a whole bunch of companies out the water.
Mm-hmm.
That's transformative. And then, you know, and then you have Anthropic coming in. Llama definitively has probably captured more mind share, I would argue. So I think that's been definitely an interesting part where you didn't typically have those types of conversations when you thought about technology shifts. When you had a major technology shift around mobile, it was like, okay, what's the iPhone going to do versus the BlackBerries back in the day? BlackBerry doesn't exist anymore. Now it's iPhone and Androids, of course. On the
Yeah.
cloud side, it was the 3 players, and you'd basically be saying, AWS had a several years lead, and then Azure, and GCP, and they'd try and compete, and you'd see sort of incremental kind of nature. With AI, you've kind of seen the foundational models basically making shift. You've got NVIDIA, you've got all of the semiconductor companies, definitively you've got the cloud providers trying to basically play their part. You've got the investment world and a ton of capital basically involved. You've got, it's become really interesting, to be honest with you, or
Definitely.
anyway, for nerds of us out there. So tons happening, lots of excitement, lots of mind share, lots of concerns as well, understandably so. So I think, but yes, very, very impactful and a major transformational shift, no question.
Absolutely agree. I think, as you said, it's an infancy, but there's just so much going into AI.
Yeah.
Everybody is talking nothing but AI, particularly in businesses. So uh, it's definitely super powerful. But
Mm.
now there's this prevalent notion that businesses must be AI driven or they risk becoming obsolete. From your perspective, how true is the sentiment? I mean, is there any
I
truth
don't
to
agree to
this?
that. Yeah, I don't
Okay.
actually agree with that. I think there's a whole world. I think the reality is, and I grew up all over the world, and so I probably have a different perspective as part of my growing up. I tend to
Hmm.
appreciate. But look, is it at the center of a lot of conversations? Sure. I think one thing I would grant it. I think it's been a long time since a major shift in technology, a major shift in basically a new platform and new ecosystem that has captured this much mind share. 105 million people signing up to one product, ChatGPT, in less than a week or 10 days or so. It hasn't happened in a long while, right? And then on the back of that, conversations within not just technology circles, but investment circles, state government, federal government, local government, the educational system, the use of AI, the regulators that sort of come into place. To happen at that pace, it hasn't happened for a while. So it's understandable that there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be like, well, look, this is at the heart of it and everything has to be AI. I understand that argument. But the reality is, at least from the investment world, yes, you want to invest in AI companies, but you want to invest in good companies. And not every good company has to be an AI company. The reason for that is very simple, is this is not easy to be able to control, manage, and secure, scale, and then deploy successfully. I mean, it has to have much more cycles in place for us to be able to see those proof points. And I think there's no shortage of industries which will be impacted by AI. But I still think it's very early. If you speak to CXOs like I do, and a lot of CIO friends that I basically have, and CTO and CISO friends, no shortage of group therapy conversation that we're typically having about technology strategy and the role, but also basically saying, okay, look, it's still in its infancy. So will it be the case? Yeah. Does it have to be all of it? So the way I would basically frame it, AI is part of the strategy. I don't think it has to be the entire strategy. That's all.
That's actually what I was thinking while you were speaking. It's part of the strategy, but it's not the whole strategy.
Yeah.
So Do you have any thoughts on how can companies that aren't AI first still carve out a successful niche in the current market where the whole buzz is AI? How do you fit in?
I honestly, I think it comes back to, I think you have to remember, ultimately, people buy good products, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that like you have to build two core things. One is build a phenomenal product, and second is build a phenomenal customer experience. So I actually think the companies that are going to compete are really competing in what I term as the experience economy, right? I think that's kind of where they are really competing. I think customer experiences have become really unforgivable. I've been saying this for several years now. So can AI play a part in that? Sure. But it can also have an adverse impact, right? I mean, speak to the airline in Canada that basically had a chatbot that said, oh, we'll be able to deploy out, a chatbot that deals with customer service. Turns out, they're legally liable. That company is basically paying for it. Okay, let's deploy out AI for, doing deflection of customer tickets, which has always been, the kind of core use case. If you're able to kind of really transform customer experience, some companies have done that well. For example, Uber, if you raise a support request, tens of millions of those support requests are completely automated. You wouldn't know the difference. Basically, it's very, very well done because the use cases are very well in place. Well, if you have a bit of a negative one that sort of comes into place, it's not going to work out very well. And so sometimes, I think customer experience at the core of it from my standpoint. I think the other aspect is, look, I think the reality is, at least from an investment standpoint, yeah, we're going to look at invest in companies in AI, but we're going to be very thoughtful, as we always have been, which say, is this a good product? Probably. Does that product mean it's a good business or a big company? Sure, most likely. But is it an investable company? And is this company going to add value and increase in value over time? That's the selfish viewpoint from an investor standpoint. The other side to that is, well, is it a good company where customers are going to be very happy constantly buying the product? There's going to be no shortage of products which don't have any AI, which people are very happy using. And, there's a whole world outside of that. So as I tend to say, there'll be hundreds of companies and there'll be hundreds of founders, and everything will be okay in the bigger scheme of things.
Definitely makes sense. I mean, it's not important to be, AI first. And
Yeah.
if you focus on customer experience and make good products, I think you will, at the end of the day, will be successful. So that's definitely
I think,
good
sorry to
advice.
interrupt, I think the thing I would say is, because AI has become much more ubiquitous, and the fact that it is available, and there's a generational change in the workforce, etc., the ability to use and deploy and experiment these tools is, of course, very advantageous. So by default, companies are going to look to adopt AI because they have the ease of doing so, right?
Yeah.
And so that is exciting, and so you could basically do that. But ultimately, you still need to build a phenomenal business. And like I said, it's part of the strategy. I don't think it's the entire strategy itself.
Agree. I think it's a tool definitely that could kind of enhance what you have already in place. So I'm just thinking about, a little while ago, we were talking about the security concerns
Mhm.
with AI. So I'm kind of broadening it a little bit. When companies adopt AI, or everybody I see and hear is like, oh, we are AI driven, we do this, we do that, we have these many algorithms, we are using LLMs, this, that, whatnot. Now, is there an aspect of educating your customer as well? What is AI? What can it do for you? Do you really need to have AI? Hey, you have a simple problem. You don't need to worry about machine learning or deep machine learning, or just spend
Yeah.
thousands of dollars, like hundreds of thousands of dollars solving a problem that is very simplistic. It could be just simple automation. So do you see these kind of scenarios, and what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that the reality is that if you want to have AI as your product offering, especially if you're selling to businesses and in fact consumers, I would argue, there is going to be a degree of concern, because there's a lot of unknown that goes into that, right? Is it exciting? Sure. Is it a transformative product? Most likely. But you're going to deploy this out. So if you go into the enterprise use case, and I've been a buyer of enterprise software for 20 odd years, etc. You're going to deploy this out to a few thousand employees, and you know who thought this was a good idea, right? And so that's one aspect of it. So one is just customer execution and being able to deploy that out. If you deploy a SaaS solution and something doesn't work, you can figure out that there's a bug there and basically figure out there's some edge cases. You deploy an AI solution and it starts going a little bit, wonky, to use a technical term. Somebody's going to have to basically pay for that, and there's going to be a serious reputational damage that goes into it, whether it's customer experience or otherwise. On the security side, it's even more so. And so one of the things I typically tend to advise founders is that if you are going to use AI in your product offering, whether it's extending an existing product or improving an existing product or extending into a platform, be very conscious of the fact that the buyer on the other side is going to ask, tell me how you are able to update your models, how you're able to scale, how you're able to think about fine tuning and RAG. How do you think about secure? With every major technological shift, there's going to be a whole bunch of issues that come in from a security standpoint. There are new security vulnerabilities. So my advice, call to action, is people to look at the updated NIST frameworks. Having been an interim and kind of an early foundational CISO for a few companies, you have to really be able to understand what you're dealing with. And so, for example, we didn't use the word data poisoning for a little while. That's a major vulnerability when it comes to AI. When you think about model exhaustion, that's another issue. That's the equivalent of what I would, probably say that's the equivalent of a DDoS attack on say a network, for example, right? So these are just two of a whole bunch of security issues that sort of come into place. If you are building an enterprise product selling into businesses, and the security professionals who are following these frameworks, who are actually, their job is to find vulnerabilities, their job is to be able to secure this industry, and you're not able to educate, you're not able to talk about them, or even worse, you're not able to understand them and actually figure out how to solve for them, that's a bit of a problem. You've had, and that's why I go back, you've had plenty of cycles, for example, in software deployment where you had vulnerability scans, and you'd scan a whole bunch of your application base and figure that out and be able to do that. Like there was certifications and conferences and industries and vendors and MSPs and professional services and system integrators, a whole ecosystem built about that. You go find me 5 professionals, professional services firms who say we'll do everything for you on the AI security side. They'd be lying, right? And so that's why it's kind of important to be able to be very thoughtful about how you deploy it.
I think these are such great takeaways that, hey, it's not only about AI and we are using an algorithm or something, but understand what it does, what it'll do downstream to your own company and to your customers. I think these are really great takeaways for anybody to understand.
One thing to be conscious of, Neetu, is security. Is the other aspect of security is, customers basically saying, you're using my, are using my data to train your model. So that's one aspect of it. Which, okay, well, you may be using my data, and maybe it's totally fine. Maybe it's just structured data, Excel sheets that you're basically trying to train your models, and that will become better for other customers. Big deal, basically. But guess what? Like, how do you make sure that my data doesn't leave your environment? That comes down to some core fundamentals of how you secure your infrastructure. Now you're basically trying to secure a model, right? And how the data doesn't leak, etc., and how it's not misused. That's a whole different conversation. And so I think it's kind of important to be able to talk about that and understand it.
I agree. And it's not, I think one thing you already kind of highlighted is it's not the traditional way of, managing data. Yeah. It's completely different. And it took us years, I think decades, to kind of get to that level of maturity, right? And now this is like a whole new baby we have to just, nurture from the very beginning, right?
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of learning for all of us to do. So you just talked about a few, I would say complementary or supplementary things that we need to kind of tackle as we are thinking AI. Are there other areas that businesses can focus on to kind of remain competitive outside of just providing AI? What else do you think? Because you literally like advise, I feel like, every company in the Valley.
That's a bit of a stretch. I've met a number of companies, sure. Biggest advice I'd give is like, have a high quality VC firm like Ridge Ventures be an investor. No, I'm just kidding. I think that would be the best advice possible, especially if you're an AI company. I'm just kidding. Look, I think I'll go back to the core. Ultimately, are you making your customers wildly successful? Are you making customers wildly happy? And as a result of that, you're going to have retention and you're going to have great customer experience. I think the other thing, honestly, is companies need to think about architecture. I used to have conversations with, a couple of my former bosses or CEOs of companies, and I say, why do you think we win against the competition? And actually, when I read between the lines as I did more digging, a large part of it was the fact that we had better architecture than those companies. And that architecture is not just in the product, but it's in the architecture of the company. So I would say there's two aspects of it. One is how do you build a phenomenal product? And the second is how do you build a phenomenal company? And I think company building is a huge journey. There's a more high percentage majority of startups that get funded do not succeed. All right. Using the word success is a pretty broad term, but yeah, there's a lot that literally won't go anywhere. And a lot will be failed. That's part of the industry. And so being able to understand how you build a company in the age of AI is also something that actually people need to take a step back, especially if you're a founder, to be able to better understand.
Wow, I mean, this is great. And as you were talking, I'm just thinking we have another podcast topic. How do you think about funding a company? And if you actually do the due diligence upfront, why do companies fail? And I'm sure there is just so much to uncover there, but
Yeah.
that's like a whole 2 hour podcast. We'll do that in future. Going back to AI. So again, in my mind, AI is a tool that kind
Mhm.
of augments what we are trying to achieve, like faster, better, quicker. Now, without humans, where does AI go? Where does it stand?
Well, I think humans need to deploy AI. I'm good with that, actually. I'd prefer that, to be
Okay.
honest with you. I'd really prefer that, to be honest with you.
It's
Um, I
like
think
bots
it's
deploying bots. That won't
Yeah, I
work.
really think that would be the best way to basically do it. Number
Okay.
one, um, you know, all jokes aside, look, I will continue to say that actually some of the biggest use cases are ones that could be quite transformational for our lives and our generations, right? And I think especially in the area of medical research, for example,
Hmm.
I think that is probably definitively one of the most exciting areas for me, where I think if you are able to accelerate being able to cure diseases or remediate, start to come up with new treatments and be able to accelerate that, I think that is definitively something where AI for good and the positive aspects to it are very, very real. So I would probably look to say that is the huge opportunity. On the other side of it, yeah, I think do you have productivity uplift? It's still very early to tell. I mean, ultimately, that you speak to, it's a very mixed um, experience that CXOs have when I speak to them. You end up basically having to come in very excited and be able to look to deploy something out, and then you discover that actually it takes a ton of work to be able to get it right. I mean, there's a reason why the revenues for professional services firms like IBM and Accenture and PwC and others have skyrocketed because of these
Hmm.
AI initiatives. They've been very well entrenched and embedded within these enterprises. And it's not the AI that's basically run; it's these humans who are basically looking to harness the use of this technology. So you've got to have a few cycles, I think, where, I mean, the reality is it's been around for 2 decades, but this has been an inflection point in November 2022. It was a
Exactly.
major movement, basically. So let's appreciate and celebrate that because it is a major turning point. Saying that, it's still very early. There's still a bunch of stuff to be done, basically. So we'll see what that partnership between AI and humans look like, but it's early.
Yeah, I think you mentioned November 2022. I'm like, okay, what happened then? I think the biggest buzz was when AI hit mainstream. It was like, oh my God, all the jobs are going to be gone. Humans are going to just sit and just watch AI do all the work. And what are we going to do? How, how, where is that sentiment going? And how true is it? Will there be, um, you know, will there be a point in time where we will actually need to worry about, damn, AI is going to take my job? What do I do?
That's already started, actually. That's actually already
But is it
started.
true? But
Yeah.
is it true? Will do you ever see a world where AI is going to take over and the rest of the world is going to watch? I know there's.
I think the reality is that there's some of this has started years ago, right? I mean, I think you have to, it's not about necessarily taking a job. I think that will happen. I just don't know to what extent. But, it's about where the new, where the technology like AI is is therefore an opportunity and therefore required. An example would basically be in manufacturing, where the use of robotics has been there
Robotics.
for decades, right? And so
True.
that definitively is the case. Did it replace factory workers? Yes, but there's still lots of factory workers working in car factories. Now, the reality to this is that basically the next step up from that is to basically say, where is AI required because it is the best way to be able to do something,
Hmm.
versus how that is controlled and implemented and then designed by humans to be able to do it. There's an argument in the school of thought, which is that there will be new skills that will basically be that will have to be built and adopted. Look, for the
Hmm.
longest time, we didn't think engineers had any issue basically getting replaced. I can tell you that most of the code being written in a lot of companies has been generated by
Like
AI,
AI. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
There's still engineers around. You still need them. They're still a big part of how you operate. So I just think that there's going to be a middle ground
Mm.
in this era. There are going to be some extreme examples. I'm not denying that. One of the things that clearly came about, which was interesting on the back of ChatGPT, is like the number of ebooks that kind of went into print
Yes.
exponentially increased because people are just creating this stuff. That brings a more ethical and a dilemma. I've written about this where I believe that
Yes.
actually when record industries had this issue, I do think that companies are going to be created and regulation is going to be put into place. You've already seen this with lawsuits that,
Hmm.
for example, some of the publications are suing some of the AI companies for the use of their data to be able to, add value and create and serve their customers without getting compensated. So those things are actually major aspects, and that may well be a good leveler, actually, right? I mean,
Hmm.
that's not the worst thing in the world. So I just think that there's these. I think there will be ebbs and flows, and I think it will then stabilize after several cycles and probably after several events. And one of them may be a regulation for intents purposes in different places.
Definitely. I think, the stabilization piece, I feel like you get used to the new world. You cannot
Mm,
adopt. Like that's
totally.
what humans have done over a time. But I
I mean, like,
also
for example,
feel.
sorry, but like
Go ahead.
self-driving cars, I'm still waiting,
Yes.
right? I mean, it's
Yes.
happening. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, but my God, it's taken ages. I mean, what an amazing experience.
Yeah.
But, right now it's still in the cities. It isn't in the long distances that's basically this. And I think that's going to take another 10 years, right?
Right. Right. Right.
Will it probably happen? Sure, but that just happens as part of generation. So people underestimate how hard it actually is. I mean, is it more possible? Probably, sure. But my goodness, and it's not going to be just about regulation and why that's going to be the case. It just takes a long time to be able to get there, and people just they underestimate that.
Definitely. That's why I was like saying, it's just so work intensive. There's
Yeah,
just so much that goes into it. And you said self-driving cars. Waymo was just in SF in the city.
yeah,
Now recently they started in other cities in Bay
sure,
Area, which is
sure.
actually progress. Not on like the highways, but they are still on the streets. So
Yeah,
that's like great. But what I'm also thinking is, as AI is evolving, we are understanding it more and we're kind of becoming friends with AI. I
yeah,
feel like certain things, as you said, are going to become obsolete, but I'm definitely sure other new, requirements from a
yeah,
skill set perspective are going to mushroom. They're going to be new things that we will have to learn to actually partner with AI, whether it's, hey, how do we build these algorithms, or in terms of engineering, or in terms of, security,
yeah.
learn these new frameworks, whatever not. I think there's always a balance. It's like give and take. Is that the right way of thinking about it? Certain things that we have been doing for last
Yeah.
like
I
100
mean,
years
look,
will be
I don't want
gone.
you replaced by an AI bot. I'd like to talk to you. So, how about that, right? Like, we'll just stick to that basics, and that's going to be for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, no problem, right? So I
Yeah,
think that's the case. In the case of things like self-driving cars, is it replacing all taxi drivers? No. Is it replacing people want to be a taxi, ride a taxi and be able to go through the service and be able to do that? Go right ahead. I think it
sure.
provides optionality. I think, but ultimately the market decides what basically makes sense, right? And the
Yeah,
market will basically say self-driving cars are here to stay for a particular type of trip, for a particular type of customer, for a particular set of economics, perhaps, right? It's
definitely.
still like I remind everyone, there's still a bunch of companies which run on mainframes, and those are 50 plus years old, right?
Yes.
So it takes a little bit of an effort for the kind of look, the doom and gloom aspect, if I basically call that. I mean, I think I actually think it takes a ton of time. I mean, look, we can talk about the cloud explosion happened. Let's look at the data, right? I mean, you think about, I used to go to AWS reInvent every single year. Okay, that increased by the attendance by about 10,000 to 15,000 every year. It
Hmm.
got to a stage where they had to literally split the conference into AWS reInvent, which is for the infrastructure folks, and then AWS reinforce for the cybersecurity folks, which is another 50,000 people, right?
Yeah,
Guess what? Majority of spend on IT still goes into infrastructure on-prem,
true,
professional services,
true.
like that sort of stuff. It's not all going to the cloud. Is it seeing the most level of increase? Of course. Is it being adopted really fast? Of course it is. But it's not the be all and end all. It's part of the strategy. It's not the entire strategy.
Yeah, it definitely, I mean, when I look around, it definitely, is overwhelming.
Yeah.
You know,
That I will
first of
agree.
all,
It is overwhelming. Yeah.
it
It
is
is overwhelming. Yeah.
overwhelming.
Yeah.
One, oh my God, what is AI?
Yeah.
And, how do we use it? Oh my God, everybody is kind of talking AI.
But
So
I'll tell you, can I tell you why that is? My viewpoint, at
tell
least, on
me,
why that is. I think the reason for that, and what I've experienced is, I think it's the power of imagination, right? If you think about it, like, why is it possible now? Well, number one, because compute has now become phenomenally powerful.
powerful.
Number two, the ability to be able to have data being ingested, and then the intelligence layer of all of the foundational models have matured, become much more ubiquitous. And honestly, I think the other piece is that there has been, the imagination, right? The
Hmm.
possibilities of what people want to be able to build, and nothing transformational has ever happened in human civilization by one individual. It always happened to have done by a collective set of folks. And so I just think that actually the reason that this, and what I basically earlier said, was that it just captured more mind share. I mean, I'm very sure that if November 2022, they announced the release of a new service in Kubernetes, you probably wouldn't be talking about it, right? Because it doesn't really impact you in
Yeah,
in, in societal terms in
true.
such a broad way. And I think the reason is that I love me a nice Kubernetes cluster, just FYI, just so we're saying basically. So shout out to my good company called Rafe, which I'm on the board of, and Hasib is a fan of
Sure.
that. But what I'll say is, you know, it is transformative because it captures the imagination. The
Hmm.
impact of this technology and this platform shift has been much more on society than it has just been in technology circles, right? And so that's why I probably compare it to, the internet and mobile. Is probably the two comparables, because that helped precipitate and kind of evolve a thinking and people's ideas and imagination. I remember when the App Store first came into place, Neetu, there's a guy, I'm literally an entrepreneur who had an app on the App Store in like iPhone 1 or something like that, with Steve Jobs announced. The guy was making hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue sitting in his kitchen,
Yeah.
in Italy, because he was able to say, well, location, iPhone,
Mhm.
let me have, basically show restaurants, etc. So I just think that by default will happen when something captures the imagination, and AI definitively has.
That's yeah, that's so true. Hey, what advice do you have for professionals or organizations. Now I'm thinking, AI is just so mainstream.
Give up and
You
go to the
talk
beach.
phone
No, I'm
and
kidding.
internet
No,
and
no.
this and that. So what advice? I think I should be asking not for professionals or organizations or leaders. I should be asking for everybody. What advice do you have for them to not feel overwhelmed by the pace of, technological change, or pace by which, I mean, it feels like every minute it's kind of, component, compounding.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
it's
yeah.
just crazy.
I'll tell you. It's very simple. You've really got to take the opportunity to learn. This is a learning generation, right? We are, candidly speaking, overly consumed by content, smart stuff like you're basically doing, and not so smart stuff, which you basically tend to see. And so we have become consumers of content. This is what this generation is. And I
Sure.
think consuming smart content and then learning and actually, getting into the crux of it is actually important. Do the homework. So if you're, my advice to a lot of the professionals I tend to basically, I advise, CXOs and CEOs of companies, but I also advise, people, young professionals who are kind of building out their career. I think you have to go to some fundamentals. Number one is, when I was starting out, when I was trying to basically try and build my career in IT and CIO, one of the things I was very, very consistent and very focused on was being able to learn every aspect of the business. That allowed me to be able to actually understand and develop a technology strategy accordingly. So I think people need to get really, get smart around it. The good news is it's much more possible. You don't, that actually is possible to be able to do so. I use a lot of the AI solutions on a daily basis. Part of it allows to be able to test it out as part of my job. Part of it allows me to basically augment some of my work, part of my job. But I think one big advice I'd give is you do have to basically accept change in a bunch of cases. You have to accept it on your terms, but you have to basically really, without providing, without having strong opinions, I think you should do the homework to be able to do it. And so I would spend time understanding how some of these things work, being able to actually test them out, being able to kind of evolve, and that would be the good use of time from my standpoint.
That's great advice. So what what trends do you see, particularly in the intersection of technology and, human intelligence? Anything that you can tell us what's coming? Before
I'll
you
give
answer.
I'll give you my perspective. Yeah, I think there's a couple of
Sure.
industries that are going to be transformed. I think one of them is probably legal. I think the legal field is being transformed. I'm spending a lot of time in looking at legal tech companies. I think the use of AI in legal, I think, is a great use case, very specifically, and I think that would be useful. And the reason for that is very simple: is when you look at broad AI use of models, you're using lots of data to be able to figure out the right level of kind of the reasoning architecture, as I call it, to be able to do it. The use case of AI, the best part is that the data set, which are laws and regulations at the foundation level, are relatively fixed, that you're able to basically constantly fine tune against, right?
Hmm.
Number one. Number two is some of those are very, very local, very state level. Some are federal, of course, federated, etc. And so therefore, being able to constantly fine tune towards a fixed data set, or a data set that's not growing largely, is actually a very, very great use case for AI, where those models can get better without the data kind of outstripping demand. And I think that's I think legal is going to be a very interesting thing, whether it's going to be law firms, and you've seen a number of companies get funded from that standpoint. Corporate legal teams. I speak to general counsels all day long. I think so. I think the legal profession is definitely being transformed on the AI side. I do think that there's going to be a whole raft of companies which are really going to be focusing on the AI infrastructure and security. I think, I do think the picks and shovels and the rail tracks for AI are still very much in the early stages. NVIDIA plays a big part in that. AWS, Azure, and GCP play a part in that, but I think there's going to be more. And I think that happened with transformation from on-prem to cloud. You had observability solutions, from Splunk and Datadog and others basically come into place. So I think this equivalent for what's happening in the AI space is going to happen. I think that's definitive. And I think there's going to be, I think I'm already seeing it, but probably a whole bunch of work in the health space, in the healthcare space. I think that's ripe for a whole bunch of stuff, but not just in medical research. But I do think that the healthcare experience could be transformed if the health systems actually get smart about it. The biggest issue right now, and I'm concerned about it, which is the fourth trend, is cybersecurity continues to be one of my biggest concerns. And I think that's at a federal level. I think we are definitively having state actors using AI for very nefarious intent. And I think that's something I'm very, very concerned about. So I think there's something to be said about the fact that we have just probably spend a lot more time being able to see how we can kind of secure hospital systems and secure our industries and secure our government, because I think that's going to be important.
Yeah, these are great points, and although kind of builds up the concern, but
well, we've got to be real about it. I mean,
that's true. That's true. That's true. We got to be real about it. We need to understand, what it entails. Is there anything that you would like to leave our listeners with about AI or general advice?
So first and foremost, I would like to say thank you. I've enjoyed, talking to you about these issues in the past. I've really, you bring a positive energy to the conversation. I think that's required in a lot of cases. My final piece of advice really is being able to get people to be able to get into a little bit more of the depth of what's happening here in the industry, and that requires a degree of focus. And it sounds easier said than done, but you actually require a degree of focus. And I think there's an opportunity for building some degree of specialization. I see vertical AI companies and vertical SaaS companies. I think there's a huge opportunity for those to be able to build. We're investors in a company called MaintainX. That company has transformed industrial kind of preventative maintenance and asset management through what it's experienced in a way that should have been done years ago, but it just figured out the right experience to be able to do it. And I think the reason for that also is the fact that you understood the customer, you understood the experience, you understand the industry. So I think that's a huge, and I think for people out there who are looking at AI strategies, careers in AI, etc., build expertise and specialization and some degree of domain depth and expertise in particular areas. And I think that would be a key piece of advice I would give.
Thank you, Yousuf. This was amazing. Like, so much to learn, so much information, and I feel like we are not even scratching the surface. It's just kind of overwhelming.
Early days. It's early days.
Early days,
yeah,
definitely.
Yeah,
but
totally.
thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking time and chatting with me.
I appreciate
And
it.
thanks to our listeners for tuning into this episode of the Inclusive Insights podcast. Remember, there is no one size fits all in business success. Whether AI driven or not, there's a place for every company in the ecosystem. Until next time, stay inclusive and keep exploring diverse perspectives.